All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? On behalf of the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition, I want to welcome you to today's information session on equity impacts and federal investments in the state's mass timber industry cluster. As I mentioned a minute ago, this is the second of two information sessions that we're conducting. If you know any colleagues or stakeholder or partner organizations that haven't been able to attend either of these sessions, they'll be able to view a recording of today's webinar on the Mass Timber website, which is at masstimbercoalition.org. Today, we're going to be providing an overview of mass timber industry projects and describing opportunities for community members to get involved with this work through our Equity Oversight Committee. We'll start with introductions of the coalition members participating today. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Lee McIlvaine, and I represent the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development to the Mass Timber Coalition. And I'll ask participants and coalition members to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with the port? Tamara, you should be available to speak and unmuted.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tamara Kennedy, Director of Economic Development, and on this project at the Port of Portland, I'm helping to oversee our workforce strategy. My colleagues in our real estate team, Ken Anderton, are overseeing the Mass Timber Housing and Innovation Factory at Terminal 2, which I'll talk a little bit about more later today.
Thanks, Tamara. How about we go to Oregon State University, Ian?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian McDonald. I'm director of the Tallwood Design Institute. We're a partnership between the Oregon State University and the University of Oregon. My colleague from University of Oregon is unable to be here today, so I'll be speaking on behalf of both universities.
Thank you. Why don't we go to Marcus?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcus Kaufman. I'm the Biomass Resource Specialist for the Oregon Department of Forestry, and I lead ODF's efforts around the Mass Timber Project.
Thank you, Marcus. So as Ian mentioned, we have a couple of coalition members who were not able to join to present today. One of them is Judith Shine, representing the University of Oregon, and Business Oregon is also a member of this coalition, represented by Donna Salter Green. A little bit of quick background on our coalition. So the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition evolved from existing relationships and prior efforts made to designate our region as a manufacturing community under the EDA's Pacific Northwest Manufacturing Partnership. State agencies that were involved in that PNMP designation reconvened following the 2020 Labor Day wildfires out of a desire to help communities impacted by that tragedy and to discuss shared recovery interests in providing replacement housing, working in forest restoration, using salvage timber, and of course, producing equitable outcomes in our recovery efforts. So together, under the leadership of the Port of Portland and with the critical support of many of the state's economic development districts, we successfully applied for the EDA's Build Back Better Regional Challenge competition in 2021 with a proposal focused on development of a modular housing manufacturing industry that utilizes mass timber plywood panels as structural elements. So we were awarded a phase 1 planning grant of $500,000 and followed that in 2022 with a successful finalist application for the Build Back Better Regional Challenge. And we're really proud to share that our proposal resulted in a $41 million federal investment in the state's mass timber industry. To share a little more about the Build Back Better Challenge, this is the flagship economic development investment of ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. There was a total of $1 billion on the table, and we successfully competed against 529 initial applicants, and then against 60 finalists over the course of a year. So I just want to share that this is sort of a unique grant structure that required applicant coalitions to apply with individual project proposals that complement an industry cluster or a regional initiative. And that means that instead of one singular grant application, we had approximately 10 different grant applications that we needed to get out the door earlier this year. Equity considerations were really central to the EDA's grant priorities, and that's why we have asked you here to join us today. Before we get more into the specific projects and equity considerations, I think we probably should answer the number one question that I know is always on most people's minds when they hear about this project. What is mass timber? Mass timber is an engineered wood product that's used in mass timber construction. It is made from compressed layers of wood, and it serves as a structural element in mass timber buildings. So rather than using a 2x6 or concrete and rebar, mass timber builds are fully constructed from wood products that support the structure of the building. Importantly, for our purposes, mass timber elements can be constructed into panelized components that then can be adapted to modular construction. And it's the vision of this group that Oregon can address its housing production and affordability crisis by manufacturing modular homes from mass timber products for use throughout the state. Increasing our housing production is really not the only benefit of mass timber. It has several environmental benefits as well. The first of which is that this product can be manufactured from smaller diameter timber, which allows us to engage in forest restoration work that ultimately can increase the timber supply and also the wildfire resilience of our resource forests simultaneously. And then secondly, mass timber captures and stores atmospheric carbon rather than emitting it like concrete does. And so that makes it a really important climate tech innovation. So we see this as an incredible opportunity to leverage substantial public investment for the public good. We envision this work as an opportunity to catalyze the emergent mass timber sector. We know that it can expedite the production of housing and create quality jobs in manufacturing, construction, and forestry industries. We intend for it to increase the wildfire resiliency of timber resources and communities living with the risk of wildfire. And we also know that this is a great opportunity to share economic benefits between urban and rural regions of the state. So it's really exciting work. And the intention of the Mass Timber Coalition is to ensure that the benefits of these investments are shared equitably throughout Oregon. I'll take a moment to describe the component projects funded through the Build Back Better Award. So this is a suite of supply chain and research projects that are funded through the EDA. And as I mentioned earlier, these are separately proposed through separate grant applications and managed by OMTC coalition organizations. So they range from housing prototyping to research and development facilities. They include workforce development investments, forestry work, and local planning and development code updates. And they're designed to be coordinated through the supply chain. You can read a little bit more about the projects at masstimbercoalition.org/projects. You'll find there some useful one-pagers that sum up the grant-funded work if you'd like to know more about any particular project. So our desired outcomes from this work include private sector investment, job creation, housing availability, wildfire resiliency, increased timber production, workforce training, and safer forestry practices. So, this is no small task. And collectively, the coalition wishes to prioritize these outcomes for underserved communities, BIPOC community members, and people living in rural areas of the state. So now I'm going to ask my colleagues in the coalition to share a little bit more detail about each of their funded projects and what they're going to be doing. and where they see opportunities for the Oversight Committee to help and inform and produce the types of equitable outcomes described here. I think we're starting off with Marcus.
All right, thanks, Lee. Great introduction. So the ODF's forestry part of this, there's really two big forestry components, one that ODF has and one that OSU has. So I'll talk about ours, and it really kind of has a broad overarching goal of doing two things: putting more small diameter material into the supply chain and making forests safer, more resilient to wildfire through thinning, essentially. So how do we intend to do that? We intend to do that by partnering using ODF's workforce to work with the Willamette National Forest in the southern end of the Willamette Valley through our Federal Forest Restoration Partnership. So essentially, we will be adding capacity to the Willamette National Forest to plan and conduct these thinning projects. And we'll be basically contracting out NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act work, which is, looking at endangered species, rare plants, cultural resources, and then we'll be administering a series of small good neighbor timber sales. And these are not large projects. In total over the next 4 years, we estimate that we'll design and produce about 10 million board feet. So not a huge amount of money. I mean, a huge amount of board feet, but certainly enough to make an impact on supplying small timbers, manufacturing for mass timber. So the other part of the effort, in addition to doing the work with the Willamette, is to stand up what we call is a track and trace program, which is essentially monitoring and providing evidence about the socioeconomic and ecological outcomes of the work. And we really want to elevate this work and help kind of the housing audience understand where the wood comes from and the kind of benefit that happens when we do these active management projects. So that's what the track and trace program is all about. And we'll be partnering with regional nonprofit Sustainable Northwest on that. So one more slide. So the equity opportunities and the places where I see that there's a great role for the Equity Oversight Committee is really helping us to ensure that the folks who could potentially benefit from these opportunities in the contracting and capacity building and the work that we're going to be doing, that those folks get reached, whether the BIPOC folks or folks in rural communities. So there's the clear connection there. There's also going to be some forestry workforce training that is going to be provided, and Tamara can talk more about that. And so we can use help ensuring that the right people are getting those messages. And then I think we really want to think about this on a longer term basis. Like, as Lee mentioned, these are not simple challenges, and we're looking for folks who want to engage with the project, kind of a longer term effort, so that we can make a deeper and broader impact on some of these equity outcomes. So I will leave it there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Marcus. All right, we're going to Ian now.
Thank you, Lee. So yeah, a good chunk of this grant includes funding to improve the research and development facilities at the two universities I mentioned. We have exemplary facilities for doing a lot of R&D work for the sector, and that's kind of indicative of the fact that the forest industry is such a big part of Oregon's economy, and the universities have been working with the wood products sector for years to try to help them innovate. And so one thing that we don't have is a fire testing facility. We have great facilities for doing things like testing the structures for seismic resilience and that kind of thing, and for testing weathering and durability, which is obviously very important in Oregon. But this project will construct an intermediate scale fire testing lab that will enable us to do a lot of really interesting work much more quickly and affordably than we currently do. We have researchers at OSU working on fire. It's obviously a huge question when it comes to mass timber buildings. But right now we're shipping samples as far away as Ottawa in Canada and Texas to labs far away and difficult to coordinate at that kind of long distance. So this will improve our in-state capabilities to do this work. Could you have the next slide, please? The second project at OSU is basically a fund for technical testing to work with Oregon manufacturers, as well as our partners at University of Oregon, to test new prototype mass timber buildings, focusing on the affordable housing and workforce housing segments. So what you're seeing in the top right of the slide there is our Emerson Advanced Wood Products Lab. That's also the big box in the picture behind me in my backdrop. So that lab is set up to do structural testing of buildings up to about 35 feet high. So you see a 3-story mass timber building. Now, this isn't indicative of the kind of things we're going to be doing with the modular mass timber housing. Really, this is a larger structure that might be, something you'd see in an office building or something like that. But the principles are the same. We will use our technical facilities and personnel to carry out different testing of the technical properties of these new mass timber homes. And could you go to the next slide, please? The third project that's under the OSU umbrella is called Smart Forestry, and it's kind of a conglomeration of different things. But really, the key thing is to look up and down the supply chain, and also link with the project that Mark has described that Oregon Department of Forestry is going to be carrying out. So we're going to be looking at fiber availability around the state, especially that restoration fiber he talked about, where we're going in to overstocked forests and we're able to take out some of the smaller diameter trees and brush and make the forest more safer, basically, and more resilient, less susceptible to disease. And then we're going to be looking at different ways of improving harvesting practices by using advanced technologies, improving safety in the forest, and developing some workforce development curriculum for people who work in the woodlands. That's going to link with the strategy that I think Tamara is going to be describing shortly, which is the holistic workforce development strategy that we envisage for this whole project. So as part of this analysis, we're also going to be focusing on looking at dry side species, so perceived lower value species like ponderosa pine, which right now are difficult to use in mass timber. And as mass timber becomes quite popular around the US and is experiencing rapid growth, we need to do there's some R&D work that's needed to close the loop on getting that material into the building codes. And so that work is going to happen as part of this Smart Forestry project as well. Could you go to the next slide, please, Leigh? In terms of ways that we think that the Equity Oversight Committee can be beneficial to those projects I just mentioned, obviously, anytime we're any of our engagement strategies and the outreach that we'll do to industry, we would love to have some guidance on the best way to do that in order to reach a diverse audience, and also kind of go beyond the traditional audience for forestry jobs and that kind of thing, which there's a large segment of the population among young people, I think, who don't really see forestry as a they're the first career option they would think of, and that's due to a variety of factors. But we want to really open up our workforce development strategies and the future opportunities that we're going to be building in these sectors, the future jobs that we're going to be building along the supply chain to as wide a range of people as possible. We would like some input into the development of workforce training for woodlands operations, and particularly when it comes to diversity and being able to bear in mind diverse perspectives. And the recruitment and retention of workers for rural manufacturing positions is seen already by industry as a real barrier to growth of mass timber and wood products in general. So that's something we would love to talk to the committee about and strategize ways to overcome those barriers. That's all for that slide, Lee. I'm not sure if I'm up next or.
Looks like it, yeah.
Looks like I'm doing my stand-in for Judith Shine, who's our collaborator at University of Oregon. So at University of Oregon, we already work closely with the University of Oregon. The Tallwood Design Institute is really 3 disciplines. One is at University of Oregon, that's the Department of Architecture, and then engineering and forestry are at OSU. So we're working already on a number of different interdisciplinary projects. One of the ones that U of O will be advancing through this funding and the EDA project will be this one, mass timber prefabricated panels for affordable housing. So they have already been working with the city of Milwaukee, for example, and others to develop modular panelized affordable housing prototypes aimed at what I guess is called the missing middle, so sort of 80 to 100% of AMI. These housing units will be made of mass ply panels, which come from Frera's Engineered Wood, which is a factory that was just established about 5 years ago in the Santiam Canyon, and their product is one of a kind in the world, actually, a brand new mass timber product, brand new wood product, period. And that was developed in partnership actually with researchers at OSU who did some of the back and forth testing on that prior to certification. So Judith's team at University of Oregon are working on these housing designs for I think 784 square foot 2-bedroom units that can be built in a variety of different configurations. Here you see what they refer to as a cottage cluster. And those are going to be prototype built, assembled in our lab and tested. And we're going to look at a range of other things besides the technical attributes themselves, things like constructability and cost and all of the rest of it. The second project kind of related to that is one called Mass Timber Energy and Seismic Facade Retrofits. This is a thing that's been done in Europe a little bit, but it's not mainstream yet. And basically you're looking at older housing stock, maybe apartment buildings built in the 60s and 70s that are still serviceable, but they have very poor energy efficiency and not great seismic performance. And so the idea is that a facade would be prefabricated and basically, bolted onto the outside of these homes to bolster the energy efficiency and also the seismic resilience of these structures. And so there has been some preliminary work already done at OSU in the Emerson lab. And we're going to be working with the team to kind of continue to develop and validate this idea for application in Oregon. Both of these things are obviously aimed at addressing the serious shortage that we have in our housing stock. And anything we can do to try to address that in a cost-effective way is of interest in this project. Next slide, please. The other University of Oregon project goes back to this idea of bolstering the R&D capacity of the state. One of the things that has been a challenge from a technical viewpoint and also a compliance viewpoint in anywhere in the US actually with multifamily residential housing is achieving good acoustic separation between floors and walls. And that's an issue because developers are at risk from and there aren't very good solutions right now. There's a dearth of data on the acoustic performance of mass timber floor systems when compared to looking at other more established systems like reinforced concrete or steel. So it makes it very difficult for designers to bring these designs to market and get them permitted and all the rest of it. So this Oregon Acoustic Research Lab will be the flagship building on the new Port of Portland Terminal 2 Mass Timber campus. And it will be really game-changing for the state in terms of our ability to innovate in this space, you know, we'll put our design teams at a significant advantage over the rest of the country. Next slide, please.
Looks like we're transitioning to the port. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. So this is kind of the hub of the site for many of these projects that we were talking about in terms of physical facility development. Terminal 2, which is a former marine terminal, or excuse me, active marine terminal that has not been used recently, but in the past was used for shipping of forest products. So it seems just as we imagine the future for this to be a repurposed, close to 50-acre industrial development site that's focused on housing innovation, mass timber development, which will have, as Ian mentioned, the testing lab, it'll have the factory, and it'll also have areas for testing around the acoustics. So what's exciting about this opportunity is we're in the stages right now looking for a factory provider. Europe is a bit ahead of the United States in terms of developing mass timber innovation, using it for housing. And so there is an RFI that's out for bid and for information that is on the port website, as well as the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition, if you want to get more information. But the vision really is to have this be a centralized hub for factory development and innovation of mass timber being used both with modular housing as well as for commercial use, and also to be able to test with R&D purposes at this site. We also see connecting this to many of the industry's growth around innovation, and as well as we'll see connecting to the workforce development. So some of the goals, as been kind of highlighted by my colleagues here on this call, but just a little bit more intentional, is that this will help us to address some of our gaps in housing production. As we know that Oregon and Washington are kind of last in the nation around of gaps of housing production. So hopefully this can be an innovative solution that helps address some of our affordable as well as general housing goals using modular and mass timber housing. The other opportunities we see is this is an area to test the connection of rural and urban jobs, as we heard from forestry, sourcing, materials, all the way to advanced manufacturing and construction, with a targeted focus on looking at who has been benefiting and who has not been from these particular industries, and how do we focus outcomes and opportunities for women, low-income communities, people of color, and rural communities to address some of the economic disparities that we have seen across these fields. In addition, as we heard about the opportunities to connect and thread through the themes of sustainable forest production, restoration, climate adaptation through housing, construction, and development, which is really kind of core to the ecosystem that we have here in Oregon, and also ensuring that we have the right resources to meet our housing needs, and that we learn as an industry, but also as a collaborative partnership across the state to really address both workforce housing needs, to address the growth and using mass timber as an innovation opportunity, and also to ensure that we have the jobs and the opportunities and skills that we need from all of these areas. Oh, and then a bit more on this regional training cluster. One of the ideas also is that we're looking to partner with Portland Community College to help us develop and work closely with the industry to coordinate the training curriculum, connect that with the needs from rural communities around forestry and sourcing, and then also work with Work Systems, Inc. to ensure that we have targeted navigation partners across the state. And we do see a lot of opportunities for the Equity Oversight Committee to help guide us and co-create ways that we can ensure the outcomes that we had anticipated are achieved. In addition to that, this portion of the grant was about $3 million with 700 plus in matching funds. And so we know that this is just the start of really understanding the broader workforce needs. But as we really kind of dive into a disparities assessment, we'll be able to provide ongoing assessments and reporting throughout each stage of the ecosystem, from, again, sustainable forestry all the way into construction and development and housing, to see how our region can be successful and also be able to address our workforce goals. Do you want to go to the next slide, Lee?
Sure.
So as I mentioned, some of the opportunities we see with this committee in terms of co-creating this is again reviewing the curriculum that's being developed, and there's going to be different stages of the curriculum. There's also a parallel opportunity to understand how this fits into the broader affordable housing, modular housing arena with the Center for Innovation Excellence with the iSector. And so they're in the process of creating an assessment of any gaps and needs. And so we think that this is a great way to tie in with the Equity Oversight Committee and engagement to see who's being able to understand the opportunities, and also how do we also ensure that we adapt curriculum and needs for both workforce, industry, as well as the various components that we have talked about today in the project. I think a lot of this is about communication and education, and then also tracking our progress over time.
Thanks, Tamara. Okay, last but not least, I hope, is the Department of Land Conservation and Development's component project. We are calling this the Code Up Development Code Modernization Project. The objective of this work is to provide funding, capacity, and technical assistance to cities throughout the state, and also unincorporated areas if needed, to allow them to access resources and provide capacity to update their community development codes. So, that ranges from planning and zoning to design codes, and even in some cases looking at state building code. So a lot of this work is going to be done through coordinated efforts of consultants, regional stakeholders, and those localities. And then we also have some capacity building funds within this award to help us get some of the economic development districts and other regional development stakeholders sort of working shoulder to shoulder on this effort. Ultimately, we hope that we will be able to support the adoption of updated development codes in 30 cities that will allow us to establish mass timber modular housing in those cities quickly when it starts to roll off manufacturing lines. So we sort of see this as the end stage of our supply chain, establishing demand where it is really needed. In terms of where we see opportunities to work together with an equity oversight committee, and to receive, I think, some benefits from working more closely with community, we really want to make sure that capacity constrained cities and regions are able to benefit from this new housing production. I think oftentimes it is the case that cities that are already lower in capacity compared to neighbors in other regions just don't have the means to get involved in initiatives like this, and make sure that they're benefiting from grant funding and technical assistance. So we want to make sure that we're reaching those communities. We also want to make sure that through the process of doing these code updates that we are engaging with underserved community members in those planning processes, to make sure that we get everyone who is in need of housing around the table working together to make sure that any new housing that is developed is directed to where it's most needed. And then finally, we really think that it's important to connect affordable housing advocacy efforts to the local planning process for modular housing. So it's our hope that the Equity Oversight Committee can help accomplish that goal by making sure that the affordable housing advocacy community is really involved in those conversations from the get-go. So that wraps up our summaries of our component projects and where those project managers, at least at this stage initially, see opportunities to collaborate with the Equity Oversight Committee. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Tamara to walk us through the committee purpose and some of the details that we know and also what we don't know at this stage.
Great. Thank you so much, Lee. And so hopefully this gives you an overview of all of the interconnected elements of this project and ways that you might see if you're interested in helping us shape the equitable outcomes across all of the areas. One of the ideas around the purpose of this Equity Oversight Committee is, again, to ensure that these federal funds are really intended to meet the desired outcomes to benefit communities who have not been able to benefit from forestry all the way into construction and manufacturing. So looking to help us shape and guide equity priorities across each of the component projects. Some areas will be probably more obvious than others, and such as workforce and others, and some might be more just ensuring that as public partners, we have commitments to equitable contracting, but if there's other opportunities to look at innovation, entrepreneurship, and areas that we can have more shared understanding about needs in different communities, in particular rural areas, we definitely look forward to having insights from this committee. The committee will also support the grantees, which is the public stakeholders, and understanding where we need to better improve our engagement, outreach, and efforts to meet our committed goals. We will be providing ongoing reporting to the EDA on our progress around these areas, and the Equity Oversight Committee will provide opportunities to co-create some of those broader targets, as well as find opportunities for us to pivot in pilot areas to work intentionally with certain partners. They'll provide some oversight and accountability so that we know that we're all in this together and that we can shape and learn this process and to be a really good model for other regions. And then the ultimate goal is to help connect underserved communities and individuals with the opportunities that we see in the mass timber sector. The next slide, please. So as I touched on some of these things, but hopefully these are the broad brush of different areas that we see oversight for impact. So again, contracting and subcontracting goals. While this is a $41.4 million federal fund, we know that as this industry continues to scale and grow with both private investment and other grant opportunities, there'll be quite a bit of opportunities for contracting and supporting emerging contractors in these spaces. There'll be quite a bit of opportunities to engage around workforce development and really looking at all the different stages of the workforce ecosystem to identify ways that we can have intentional outcomes with these investments. Looking throughout how we look at the educational opportunities, what are some of the intentional collaborations with either pre-apprenticeship programs or other target opportunities in different parts of the state. Really identifying access and career pathways, service provider selection, and then our ultimate goal is how is this new innovation helping to address our housing crisis and increasing housing production across the state? And are we any better off over the years as we do this work? And how can we intentionally make good examples for the rest of the country, as well as, of course, in the West Coast? And then we see a lot of opportunities around collaborating with forest restoration and timber production and ensuring that we have really good opportunities for engagement, for innovation, and for climate solutions across these project areas. So at this initial stage, and this is, again, maybe tweaked a bit of time, but really thought a 11-member panel is going to be the initial group that'll be representative of urban and rural regions. We really want to work and be ensure that those where these projects are really intended to benefit, the people have a voice at the table and can have representation at this Equity Oversight Committee. We also want to ensure that there's areas of technical expertise represented from industry, from labor and trade unions, and from other community-based organizations that are, again, statewide. This committee will be staffed by initially an Oregon Mass Timber Coalition member, either directly or through one of our consultant partners, to help just set up and ensure that we have good process as well as designed outcomes throughout the stages, and that we have everyone that's been involved has a true understanding of what it means to be in a diverse committee that has this intentionality. We will ensure that participants, in particular from community partners and their non-public members, are compensated for their time. And we will ensure that participants that are selected are connected to the grantee organizations, and that there can be a process ongoing that the committee will help us define and design how we have continual representation for this committee over time. That's what we know today. So we're reimagining the initial responsibilities, and you'll see once you submit your areas of interest, there'll be a charter and there'll be more upcoming information sessions for engagement, but helping to shape the committee design, determining our governance structure, setting expectations of participation, determining the priorities of the committee, and identifying any necessary resources throughout the different stages of the component projects, as well as specifically for this Equity Oversight Committee. And with that, if there's any questions, you'll be also, as a follow-up, Lee will be sending out a survey internally at the port. Damien will be kind of collecting that information to ensure that we can follow up with anyone, but we will close. This is our closing of this webinar, but are open to any questions. And I'm thinking, Lee, is that going to be moderated through the chat or?
Yeah, let's see. We have both a Q&A application and a chat open. So let's see, Jesse, I see your chat question regarding whether webinar participants are muted. If you have a question that you would like to share with the group or ask of the panelists, you can go ahead and raise your hand and I should be able to unmute you at that point. There's also the opportunity to ask your question through the Q&A application within Zoom if you'd prefer to do it that way. So we'll take questions now. If you have questions about specific projects or about the Equity Oversight Committee structure or where this opportunity is headed, we're happy to have a conversation.
Do you want to take that, Lee? That
Yeah,
question?
sure. Thank you for a question, Micah, regarding whether slides would be sent to participants. Yes, I can do that. I will send out following this webinar both the slides and information about how to apply or express interest in participating in the Equity Oversight Committee. I'll also send out, it may not be today, but in the future, a link to where this recording is going to be hosted on the Mass Timber Coalition website so that you can send this recording link to others that might be interested in learning about it. Thanks for your question, Micah. Thank you for your question, Stephanie. Why don't I go ahead and unmute you so you can ask any follow-up questions if you'd like. You're unmuted.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm curious around what the estimated time commitment is for like per month for this committee and how long. For example, are we doing terms for committee members or is this throughout the duration of the project? I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that some of it is to be determined by how the committee would like to form the commitments that it's going to be making. But at this stage, what we anticipate is between 4 and 6 meetings per year. So maybe quarterly or slightly more frequent than that, with meetings lasting 2 to 3 hours. Any work that is conducted by Equity Oversight Committee members in terms of outreach or engagement, really would not be required unless those committee members wanted to volunteer for work that they were scoping themselves. And then in terms of the overall term and time commitment, I think we'll probably seek to impanel the first iteration of this committee with differing term lengths. So, maybe 1, 2, or 3 years so that we don't have everyone rotating off at the same time. So it'll really be up to folks who are expressing interest in participating to let us know if they want to be in this for the long haul at an initial stage, or if they, maybe just would like to commit a year to it early on.
And I'll just add, part of that, in addition to what Lee mentioned, is that some of these projects, like for example, the factory, there isn't maybe a lot in the initial stages of development because we're looking to find a provider and have that being built. Workforce is going to have different stages of engagement. So depending on if someone's very strongly interested in the forestry stage, that's going to come earlier on than perhaps the construction stage. And so as we have a little bit more clarity of the overall timelines and milestones across all the projects, what the committee will help us be informed as well. That'll also help inform kind of terms of service. But I think to Lee's point is that we want to have a staggered equity oversight committee that has ongoing connective threads, so that if we do have turnover, we can make sure that we have a really good baton toss to the next person to continue the great work, but then also that we create and connect it to the project timelines and goals.
Any other questions, or if you just have general feedback that you'd like to share with us, now would be a great time.
And if you don't now, if you have questions you want to follow up with us, that's great. And also if you think of some other stakeholders that maybe weren't able to participate in today's webinar, but are interested in being engaged, we're very happy to have either additional conversations with folks if you need additional information, and or hopefully people will fill out the survey and we can follow up from them from there.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your participation today and your interest. Oh, I did see a hand come up. Donna, let's see. Go ahead, Donna, you are unmuted.
Great, thank you. I know that this is kind of an ongoing process, getting input from folks. Will we plan on having frequently asked questions posted to the website so that as people kind of come into this incrementally or are trying to gauge their interest, that might help inform them?
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. We'll see how many questions are coming in. And I think, we are still building out the masstimbercoalition.org website, but as we start to form more of the project elements that are informing this work, including the Equity Oversight Committee, we probably can dedicate a web page or two to making sure that those questions are answered easily. I should mention also that Donna is our representative to the Mass Timber Coalition from Business Oregon. So thanks for your assistance on this project. And Stephanie, I can see you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you. Hi, it's me again. My question, or it's actually more of feedback. I'm just curious. I guess when I'm hearing BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, I also think that it's important to call out that tribes, especially tribal forestry programs, may be their own entity just because of their governance structure and relationship with local and state governments versus like our urban Indigenous community, which is made up of many tribal nations. And so just some feedback to maybe consider how engagement with tribes will be integrated and I guess outreach to through this process. And I guess just thinking about to the question of like how does that change the makeup of the Mass Timber Equity Oversight Committee, or how do we want tribal representation to show up in this space? I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, that's it's an excellent comment, and I think maybe Marcus, you're probably well positioned to respond to what we know at this stage.
Yeah, Stephanie, thanks for your question. It's a good one because, obviously outreach to the federally recognized tribes it's government to government consultation. So, we do have a tribal coordinator at ODF, and I raised this question of should we be outreaching to the federally recognized tribes about this particular opportunity. And the feedback I got was that essentially this didn't rise to the level of government to government communications. So we're looking at other avenues, the natural resources working group, the cultural resources working group, and then direct outreach to tribes, particularly around the forestry, housing, and workforce opportunities. One of the things that tribes have asked of us is that we have a single point of contact to kind of narrow down the number of requests to participate on committees. because many of the tribes are stretched very thin. So we're trying to respect that and recognize that. But I'm very much looking forward to tribal participation in this project, and we're kind of getting our feet under us and moving forward on that.
I was just gonna say, I think it's a parallel but separate strategy because it has a different level of governance required with lots of deep intentionality, and it's great. I think we have a lot of opportunities, what Marcus is talking about on the forestry side. But we did want to make that distinction that is a separate engagement strategy than what we are looking at this point, because we want to be deeply respectful of tribal sovereignty.
Thanks for your question, Stephanie. Are there any others? All right, hearing none, we're looking forward to following up and engaging more with you, hopefully answering any future questions you have about working on this initiative through the Equity Oversight Committee. And thank you again for your time today. We know that everyone is very busy leading up to the holidays, and so we are not taking this for granted, but looking forward to staying in touch. And thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.